Hello, thank you for joining us for the Schools are leading in getting to zero energy case studies from around the US. I am Connie Umfris, Communications Manager here at New Buildings Institute. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping things to tell you about. First, you are muted and we cannot hear you. This helps keep the background noise down so that everyone can better hear the speakers. I want to direct you to the dashboard that you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are having technical difficulties and cannot see the slides or hear our speakers, you can use the question pane in this dashboard to let us know, and we will help you as we go. We will take a few questions at the end of the presentation. Please ask your questions in the same question pane. Please take a couple of minutes to answer the survey that will pop up after the session. If you are seeking AIA credits, this is where you will enter your AIA number for credit. The session is being recorded. All registrants will receive an email tomorrow with links to the recording and slides for the session, and attendees will receive a certificate of participation in that same follow-up email. Kicking off today's session is Riley Loveland, NBI Project Manager. Riley is NBI's Sustainable Schools expert. She leads our schools projects, including work around getting educational facilities to zero energy and zero carbon. Over to you, Riley.
Good morning. Thank you, Connie. It's always nice to get to spend my mornings talking to you all about the feasibility of these zero energy schools. And as Connie said, if you've tuned in before, you're probably familiar with my voice. I'm Riley Loveland. I'm a project manager over here at NBI. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And so for those of you tuning into an NBI webinar for the first time, welcome. NBI is a national nonprofit who works to reduce energy and carbon emissions in new and existing buildings. And really, we've been working in the schools market for many years and are thrilled to share what we've learned about getting to zero over time. For those of you seeking the continuing education credit, these are the learning objectives for today for you to refer back to as needed. But before we dive in, I'm going to do a quick recap of the concept of getting to zero in schools. So zero energy schools and zero carbon schools are kind of this new evolution, or zero carbon is the newest evolution of sustainable high performance buildings. And this concept of sustainable buildings has honestly been around for quite some time, but these buildings are the current iteration and really the future of all school buildings and all buildings in general. They deliver cost avoidance from utility bills to the classroom and the facilities. They create these really comfortable and productive learning environments. They provide these hands-on, future-focused learning opportunities, and they can ultimately contribute to stronger and more resilient communities. So NBI has been researching this market for years, and we've learned that the concept of getting over time is a successful approach. Getting to zero over time is a concept introduced to us by our good friends at RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute, and this concept really takes a long-term and strategic approach to energy management, where the main focus is on the benefit to the learning environment itself. This process will leverage every opportunity to improve energy performance in the building lifecycle, and this could be lighting retrofits and equipment replacements to modernizations and new construction. So a district will set a measurable goal for a portfolio or an individual project by using policies and guidance documents to achieve these goals, and then regularly report on progress. There are different types of goals that a district can set, and as I just mentioned, these goals need to be measurable, and because you can't count what you can't measure, and can pertain to things like energy reduction, renewable energy production, and carbon emission reductions. And here's some examples on the screen here. Examples might be reducing energy consumption by 50% below a specific baseline by a certain year, like 2030, eliminating combustion of natural gas by 2040, generating 100% of power needs by 2030, or achieving an average portfolio site EUI of 25 kBTU per square foot per year by 2030. Districts can really use these goals to help guide the decision-making process on a portfolio-wide scale to get to that zero goal over time. So This idea of zero energy or zero carbon, I know, can be an extremely daunting one, if you're thinking on a portfolio level or even on a project level. So this concept of getting to zero over time means that you need to leverage these opportunities as they naturally occur so that you eventually get to zero. So think of the building life as a timeline. Maybe every 50 years you need new HVAC, every 5 to 7 years new lighting upgrades, roof replacements, maybe there's a new bond, board turnover, whatever you can think of. So use these opportunities to make these zero energy upgrades and drive down the energy and carbon use over time. So this is kind of the overall process, which is identifying that zero hero or that champion to guide your goals, guide them through different projects, through your portfolio, benchmarking your facilities so you understand exactly where you are and where you need to go, and using energy as a core area in facility assessments and the master planning process, and then finding synergies with current projects. You can save money by utilizing projects already in place and identifying and capitalizing on that low-hanging fruit. Like I mentioned earlier, aligning with building life cycle events as they're naturally occurring. If you're already digging into the walls, use that to make them much tighter and more efficient. Incorporate energy and the goals I mentioned on the last slide into these policy guidance documents so it's actually written down and people can refer back to it. And then regularly report on progress. And what I mean by that is, of course, reporting to the board, but also do it publicly. You can report on progress on a website. You can, have a sustainability beat newsletter, whatever you're looking for, just so that you can continue to build on your success. And I included this slide to help you all kind of conceptualize the process of getting to zero over time, because as you listen to the next two presenters, they've done some amazing work getting their portfolios and building projects to zero energy by having that guiding zero goal. And honestly, if you'd like a more in-depth dive on getting to zero over time, I highly recommend you check out the NBI recorded webinars. And I have some links to those at the end of this presentation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's exciting presenters. Mike Wilson is the Director of Facilities for Warren County Public Schools out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. He just told me they have over 500 square feet in their district, or 500 square miles, not square feet, in their district in Kentucky. And they had the first zero energy school and have been operating at net zero for 10 years. And Kate Bubrisky is the Director of Sustainability and Building Performance at Arrow Street Architecture and Design, and she comes to us out of Boston, Massachusetts. So Mike, I'll control your slides, but I pass the mic off to you.
Thank you, Riley. And first of all, I would like to say on behalf of Warren County Public Schools, thank you to NBI for allowing us the opportunity to share our story. Again, my name is Mike Wilson. I am Director of Facilities for Warren County Public Schools in Bowling Green, Kentucky. We are right on I-65, about 60 miles north of Nashville, Tennessee, about 90 miles south of Louisville, Kentucky. So it gives you a general idea of where we're located. We are the fourth largest school district in the state of Kentucky. We have over 17,000 students, over 2,500 employees. We're the second largest employer in South Central Kentucky. We have a, I don't know if you want to call it being titled an early adopter, being progressive, forward thinking, whatever. But we're known throughout the state, and I guess even throughout the country now, as leaders in various aspects, and one of which is in the energy management venue. Warren County Schools, as Riley said, has the nation's first net zero energy school, but we didn't start out with that being the goal. And part of our story was we started all the way back in 2003 as the first district in the state to have an energy manager, a paid energy manager on staff. And that energy manager came on board and really got the district thinking about energy consumption, energy usage, and started to drive down that consumption to the point where a net zero school made sense. To date, the cost avoidance in the energy management function alone has saved the district over $17 million. And I say that because a lot of people, when they talk about net zero, they may be in favor of it, may say that that's a good idea, but they just really can't afford to do it right now. I would say that you can't afford not to do it right now. This pandemic that we find ourselves in is going to cost the district a lot of money. The economic impact to our state and local economies is going to be drastic. We have to come up with every penny that we can. And so the energy conservation, energy management has saved the district millions of dollars that we've been able to put back into the school system. I need to mention that not only am I the district's facilities manager, at one time I was a school board member. I served as a member of the Warren County Board of Education for 12 years, 10 of those 12 years either as the board chair or vice chair. And what we came to realize as a board is that our #1 expenditure to our general fund was salaries, teachers' salaries, classified salaries. Our #2 expenditure was in energy costs, water bills, electric bills, gas bills. And so every dollar that we could save in our utility expenditures went right back into the classroom, whether it was for teacher salaries, for school books, school buses, textbooks, etc. So there was a very real and tangible benefit to the story that we have. So I mentioned in 2003, we hired the state's first energy manager. And if we go ahead with the slides, I'll walk you through our story here at Warren County Schools. You can see there is Alvaton Elementary School. Alvaton was an existing school. It was well over 50 years old. It was time to basically tear that school down and build a brand new one. And we went with a new construction process called ICF, or insulated concrete forms. And that was the nation's first ICF school. And what we found was, one, the safety factor with an ICF school, the walls of that building can withstand up to 250 mile per hour winds. We are in Tornado Alley, I guess you might say, here in Warren County. So the safety factor was always first and foremost in our thinking. And what we found out with ICF school was their energy consumption went down as well. Those insulated concrete form walls would hold the heat in the winter and also insulate the school in the summertime to keep the cool air in. And so that construction process is one that we started with as a district that was the next step, I would say. This school opened in 2006. So we had our energy manager on board driving down the energy consumption, and then starting with ICF construction process, that was the next step that we took in our journey. You can see on the next slide that Alvaton Elementary did open in 2006. It has over 79,000 square feet under roof with 750 students. So that led us to our next school, which is Bristow Elementary, which is near and dear to my heart because it was the school I went to, elementary school. That school was built, same thing with Alvaton. The school was well over 50 years old. Both Alvaton and Bristow and the next school that you'll see, Richardsville Elementary, were all former high schools that were consolidated well over 50 years ago. So the buildings themselves were 60, 70 years old, had multiple issues. And the same thing was decided was to build brand new schools adjacent to those on the same property and tear down the old school. Bristow Elementary was built at the same time that Richardsville Elementary was. They both opened in 2010. And Bristow Elementary is a net zero ready school, meaning it is constructed, basically the only thing that it needs is solar panels on top to be net zero energy. And the next slide will show you that Bristow, again, opened in 2010. We built our schools for a 750 student capacity because we are a growth district here in the state of Kentucky. We're the fastest growing district in the state, fastest growing city in the state of Kentucky here in Bowling Green. And so we're a growth district, and we try to, as much as we can, plan for that growth. So Bristow, along with Richardsville, which is our next slide, you will see Richardsville Elementary School. Richardsville is the nation's first net zero energy school. It too, just like Alvaton and Bristow, was built with ICF construction. We also use in our district, where possible, geothermal heating and cooling. So that was another step that we took with the ICF construction, coupled with the geothermal heating and cooling. And the energy consumption, energy usage at this school is, and I wish I had the numbers off the top of my head, I do not. But the average school district in the state of Kentucky used over 23 kilobtu's. This school is at 23 kilobtu's, I believe. And so Richardsville was the first net zero energy school in the nation. And I've mentioned before, if 15 years ago, if you were to have taken a map of the United States and said, let's build the nation's first net zero energy school, where are we going to build it? Where are we going to place it? I promise you, not one person out of a million would have chosen Little Richardsville, Kentucky to place the nation's first net zero energy school. Yet we were able to do that. And so I mentioned that to let you know, and I know we probably have people on this webinar from across the country. If we can do it in Richardsville, I'm almost 100% certain you can do it in your area. It can be done. So as the next slide will show you, again, this school opened up in 2010. It's been in operation for over 10 years now. A little bit of a smaller student capacity there. That community is not in the northwestern part of our county, not quite as large, but well over 550 students are in that building. We use the school itself as a learning tool. We use it, some of the students in that school can actually give tours of the building. They can actually show you, there's a hallway that has like the geothermal hallway. There's one hallway that's the recycling hallway. There's one that's the solar hallway. So the students themselves can use the teachers there at that school can use the building itself as a teaching tool. And we don't ever want to take for granted that we have a net zero energy school. We want the students to know what a net zero energy school is, that they are actually in that building and what that means to them. And hopefully that they can learn as a student and carry on into the adult life what energy management, energy conservation means. And I've heard stories of where kids have gone home and maybe corrected or admonished their parents for, hey, you left the lights on, or hey, the refrigerator door's open. They're actually telling their parents that because they understand what that means. One thing I do want to mention is that when we say net zero energy, I don't want there to be a misconception that these students are cold in the wintertime and they have to wear their coats inside, or in the wintertime, or excuse me, in the summertime that they're hot and they're uncomfortable. Again, we go back to safety being the first and foremost thing that we're concerned with our students, and we certainly don't want them to be uncomfortable in the building, and nor do we want the teachers and staff in that building to be uncomfortable too. We want to have the best learning environment that we can for all of our students, and the net zero energy is certainly a step in that direction. And so, as we mentioned, both Richardsville and Bristow were constructed in 2010. They've been open in operation since then. Every month, or not every month, but we generate more electricity through our solar panels than that building consumes. So that at the end of the year, we actually receive a check back from our utility for the difference in what we've actually generated. The school has not had an energy bill since it's opened, and that money that we use goes to recoup the initial cost of the solar panels. Now, as many of you know, the cost of the solar panels in 2020 is a whole lot less than it is in 2010. So that has helped us in our goal as we move forward. Every building that we construct is net zero ready. And in our next slide, you'll see our next school that we built is South Warren High School and Middle School. That is the largest K-12 building in the state of Kentucky currently. It has a high school to the right, and to the left is the middle school. It's joined in the middle by a common auditorium, and then the kitchen cafeteria is common. Cafeterias are separate for each school, but there's a common kitchen to generate efficiencies there. And so every building that we build, every school that we construct, we learn from and try to improve on the next building. Again, this is an ICF school, and it just so happens my kids go to high school and middle school there. The next slide will give you a little more detailed information on that. And it opened also in 2010. The square foot under roof is over 300,000 square feet under roof, 334,000 to be exact, and 1,250 student capacity on the high school side, 750 student capacity on the middle school side. As you can see, opening 3 schools at one time was a pretty lofty task, but we did due to the growth and the student capacity that we needed. Our next school that we opened up was a few years later, an elementary school, Jody Richards Elementary School. This again, built with ICF construction, geothermal heating and cooling. 750 student school, opened a few years later for continued growth. Nice facility. My youngest daughter went to school in this building. I would know as a parent if my kids as students were uncomfortable, either hot or cold in their buildings, and I'm glad to say that I haven't had a complaint from any of my children being uncomfortable temperature-wise in their school. And the next slide shows where we do have, again, this school opened in 2011 and over 80,000 square feet, with, again, a student capacity of 750 students. The next school that we're going to show you is just opened a little over a year ago. It's Jennings Creek Elementary School, and it is our district's second net zero energy school. One thing that you probably didn't catch in, I don't think that photo showed it of Richardsville, but there are solar panels on top of the school itself, but there's also a second array in the parking lot to be able to generate the solar energy needed. In Jennings Creek, it has a much smaller solar array on top of the roof of the school. There is no second solar panels out in the parking lot because they're not needed. This school is the most energy efficient school in our district, and it is, again, it's just over a year old, so we don't have quite yet the numbers for it. The initial numbers said that it is our most energy efficient school, and I think the numbers will bear it out as soon as they come out and can be finalized. But this is the way that we build our schools. We build them to be net zero ready or net zero when they open up. This school happens to be a school that houses our most vulnerable students as far as socioeconomic. We have the entire socioeconomic range in our county, from highly affluent to near poverty levels, actually poverty levels. And we want to make a concerted effort as a school district to make sure that every student in Warren County schools, regardless of the zip code they happen to live in, that they have the best learning opportunity that they have. And this happens to be a Title I school, but we feel like that the students at Jennings Creek Elementary are as deserving of a quality education as any other student in the state of Kentucky, and that's what we deliver to them. We have, as the next slide would show you, we do have opened in 2018. Last year was the first school year. It's our largest school with over 87,000 square feet, again, 750 student capacity. ICF construction, geothermal heating and cooling. We do have LED lighting in this school. And that leads me to my next thing. This is the last school that we've opened. We currently have a school under construction right now called Cumberland Trace Elementary School. And it sits right on I-65. If you happen to be in the area and you're traveling between Louisville and Nashville, Tennessee, you'll see this school sits up on a hill. And it's going to be almost a mirror image of Jennings Creek Elementary. It'll be over 87,000 square feet, net zero ready, possibly even net zero. I don't know where we stand on our solar panel situation there. But we do build every school that we do to be highly energy efficient. And we've worked very closely with our construction team, with our architects, who are Sherman Carter Barnhart, with offices in Lexington, Kentucky and Louisville, Kentucky, and also with our engineers, CMTA. We've worked very closely with them from the get-go, both at Alvin Elementary in 2006, as well as Richardsville and Bristow in 2010, when we opened up the first net zero school, and we work with them now. One thing I want to emphasize is that net zero is not only for new construction, but it's also for renovation itself. And we have a current high school that is well over 70 years old, and parts of that building need to be renovated. So we tore down the kitchen cafeteria, rebuilt a brand new kitchen cafeteria, which also doubles as a practice gym. And that kitchen cafeteria project renovation was built with ICF construction. So even as we renovate buildings, we will renovate with ICF to help with that energy conservation. And mentioning CMTA, the district entered into a guaranteed energy savings contract with CMTA, and we went back with every building, not just school, but every building, including our central office, our maintenance department, our bus garage, etc., and retrofitted with water savings devices, with LED lighting, We even put some solar panels on our maintenance building. So wherever we could generate some solar energy that was cost effective, we've done that. So we've worked very closely with our architect. They have been hand in hand with us from the beginning. And I think they would tell you that from our first net zero project, they've learned a lot. And so not only has Warren County Public Schools benefited from this journey, but every other school, not just school, but building in the state of Kentucky has benefited from what we've learned. And I feel like as a district, I finish up, what we discussed when we first started was that we have been early adopters, we've been progressive, forward thinking, however you want to term that. We look at it as we want to do what's best for the students of Warren County Public Schools, but we also want to do what's best for our taxpayers here in the community. I can, with a straight face and very honestly, tell any student in this district that you have the best facilities, I feel, in the state of Kentucky to go to school and learn. And I can tell every parent and every person who may not even have a child in our district that they're getting the most quote unquote bang for their buck with their taxpayer dollars. And that I go back to that over $17 million that we've been able to save as a district. We have done what we can as a district. Our board has continued to look into ways such as that guaranteed energy savings contract to save that money and put it back into the classroom. So I really feel fortunate that we have, over this time, with our design firm, our architect, with our engineers, they've all been on board. Maybe not initially, but they've been open to learning. They've been open to learning some of their ways. And these last slides will show you our ICF schools, the square footage, some of our largest schools, and the energy usage over the last 12 months. And you couple that with the next slide, some of our older schools before they had the energy savings. Some of these older schools that are smaller in square footage but have much higher energy usage. And so the final slide will show you that the average kilowatt usage is lower in those ICF schools that are more energy conscious than the ones that we had before, even though there's larger square footage. So with that, I want to thank you all for hearing Warren County Public Schools story. Feel free to reach out to me. My email and phone is listed there, and appreciate your interest in doing what's best for your districts as well. Thank you very much.
That was so great. Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to pass the slides and presenter off to Kate Bubrisky here and put myself back on mute. It's all you, Kate.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about a project that's located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's called the King Open and Cambridge Street Upper Schools and Community Complex. It's a very long title, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. So there was four main goals of the project. One was to really create a community amenity in this part of what is the East Cambridge neighborhood of Cambridge, to focus on equity and inclusion, which are important parts of the missions of the two schools that are in this building, but also to be inclusive and equitable in, again, that East Cambridge neighborhood as they bring the community an amenity on this site. Healthy environment, not only for the interior of the building, but also thinking about the exterior environment and the global environment. And that was a big piece of the net zero component. And then having it be learning centered for the students that are there, for the people that use the building off hours and after hours, and for the community as well. And the four metrics that really helped us meet those goals were, again, focusing on getting to net zero emissions,
Kate, let me know if you need me to control your slides.
Yeah, you might need to because it's in.
Okie doke.
There it goes. Net zero emissions, having a goal of hitting to LEED Platinum under version 4, 100% water reduction, as well as meeting red list free in the interior materials. The project, as I mentioned, has a really long name, and that's because there are a bunch of different entities on this site. There's the King Open School, which is an elementary school. The Cambridge Street Upper School is the middle school. There's a public branch library called the Valente Library. The district administration for all of the city is located here as well. There is an exterior pool that has some indoor spaces, locker rooms and things like that. There is all of the sort of shared spaces for the school are also functioning as a civic and common assembly spaces for the community to use. There's a couple of other smaller programs that aren't on this diagram. There's a preschool that's run by a separate city department, as well as after-school programs that are used by these two schools, but also schools throughout the district. So it's about 930 students. It serves students all the way from PK to 8. It's about 273,000 square feet and 4 stories. On the orange colors, the 2 schools are 4 stories, and the other half of the site that is 3 stories. The cost for this project that was fully funded by the city is $476 a square foot, which is in alignment with other schools that are being built in Massachusetts that are not net zero. And it opened last August. Just going to show you some photos of the finished project. If you're not familiar with Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's directly across the river from Boston, so you can see the Boston skyline and the background in this photo. The building is a fairly tight urban site in a dense, mostly residential, but somewhat commercial area as well. The green space you see kind of behind the building in this photo is actually public open space. It is not part of this city plot that the school is built on. The building was basically divided into 2 sections. There is the main classroom and academic spaces on the west side of the site, and on the east side, as you saw in the previous diagram, is the more community and public accessible spaces. And along the front of the building, we were able to develop a sort of a civic plaza and preserving a 100-plus-year-old sycamore tree that really is part of the history of the site. And we were able to increase the amount of open space on the site by about ½ an acre, and increasing all the green space on the site, which was previously all asphalt parking spaces around the previous existing building that was there. So you can see the exterior of the building. It's a net zero building, so it's very covered with PV, not only on the roof, but also we have facade-mounted PV and some solar thermal panels as well. Just going to flip through so you can see some of the images of this project to get a sense of the building. In the center between the 2 wings of the building, there is a central learning courtyard that is flanked by the connectors that go from one side of the site to the other. And on the inside of the building, unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the school being closed, we weren't able to install the last of the educational graphics. I can't show you any of those spaces today, but there are environmental graphics that are in the learning corridors of the school as well. So net zero emissions definition, pretty straightforward. An ultra low EUI building who's using on-site or off-site newly constructed renewables to offset the energy use, and that has no fossil fuel combustion on site. So it's an all-electric building. And I'm going to kind of talk through the rest of the case study by going through our design process. And so starting with the beginning of the project, which was at the end of 2014, we really needed to set an EUI goal. Net zero was already a goal of the project, but we really were trying to figure out what should the target for EUI be. None of the blue bars existed, except for one of them was in construction during the time we started this project. So we didn't have a lot of benchmarks. We knew what typical schools were designing to in Massachusetts, and that's that orange bar. So we looked at the 2030 challenge. We've looked at other precedents across the country to try to help us benchmark where we wanted to be. And our original target was actually an EUI of 30, and the building at the end of design. Going in operations is actually at 25. I put all of these blue bars on here for these other projects in Massachusetts to just show, from the time that we started this project 5.5 years ago, we went from having no precedent to having lots of districts across the state, from the urban to the rural areas of Massachusetts, realizing the value of net zero and that it is achievable. It's something that they can do. So it's exciting to be on this project as the first one in the state, but also sort of setting a new standard and a new trend of being able to have more net zero projects. So the design process that we use, sort of a simplified process of how we get to a net zero project, isn't that unlike most design projects. You're going to start with design of the building and thinking about the envelope and the enclosure, because that's where you can make the biggest impact on energy. And then looking at efficient systems and mechanical and electrical systems, thinking about measurement and verification. That's really important to be able to know once you're in operation, how can you measure your energy, know where it's going, verifying that it's working the way that you want. And that also has a training component and an education component. And then none of the first three things would really get us anywhere if we weren't really focusing on occupant engagement from day one when we start a project in pre-design all the way through operations and post-occupancy, because those occupants are the ones who are really going to affect the energy. They're the ones that are going to use the building, once designers and contractors are gone. And so we really need to make sure we're making a building that works for them, because they're going to impact the energy use. And then, of course, the last component is once you've hit your EUI target is the renewable energy piece. So as I mentioned, design is thinking about massing and orientation and your envelope enclosure. And again, those are the pieces where you have the most impact on reducing the loads of the building. And so for this particular project, you'll see the values there on the right. And what I'd like to talk about here is that this building is slightly better than the code in Massachusetts at the time of when this building was being designed. And so I'd like to point that out so that you can see that it's not about going extremely beyond what's already being required by the code, that you can achieve an airtight and thermally isolated building with very simple construction and with values that are typical for commercial construction in the Northeast. And the actual system behind this is just a 6-inch metal stud with a continuous mineral wool insulation on the exterior. The next step, when we start looking at MEP systems, the two tools that we use are iterative energy modeling from the very beginning, helping us set UI targets, and then looking at systems, looking at energy conservation measures. Life cycle cost analysis is also really important, especially when we're looking at the main driver of choosing the mechanical system and plant. And so we want to make sure that we're doing something that works for all the parameters we're looking at, from hitting an EUI target to hitting a budget to hitting construction budget to hitting an operations and maintenance cost, and looking at a payback that makes sense for a particular community. This particular project, similar to the projects in Kentucky, employs a ground source heat pump system with geothermal wells, closed with geothermal wells, and those are supplying chills and hot water to the radiant panel system. And there's a displacement ventilation system. And this is something we find is really important, is to decouple the heating and cooling from the air system. So you're not relying on air to do all of your heating and cooling as well as ventilation. That's a really important thing that we found when we're trying to hit ultra low EUIs. And here's a full list of the different mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems that are incorporated in the project. As I mentioned, there's a geothermal well field, almost 200 wells, and that again is supplying radiant heating and cooling with displacement ventilation. There's heat recovery, of course, and demand control, CO2 ventilation, LED lighting, which is pretty standard, and daylight control. And we also use on-demand hot water. So those are basically at every sink or every 2 sinks that is a restroom. And those are on-demand points of use hot water systems. The next step is really thinking about measurement and verification. Again, as I mentioned, you need to know what's happening in your building so you can look at what's going on, especially if you start seeing energy usage that you didn't expect. And so on this particular project and other projects, we see owners that are really committed to doing initial commissioning and having commissioning agents available for a couple of years after the building opens. Training happens, during construction, during initial operation or opening, and then also having continuous training. Those are different platforms, whether it's videos and on-demand things that the training staff can use, who again are always there at the beginning of a project opening. Staff does change over time, and so you need to be able to make sure everyone coming in understands the training. And a building management system, which is fairly standard for large commercial buildings. It also is about the occupants and not just the facilities and maintenance staff. So we provide instruction manuals. We try to make them graphic. We literally take photos of the building after it's done construction so they can see exactly like what a thing, whether it's a thermostat or a lighting control, what it looks like in their space. And we provide that to them physically. So there's one in every room. There's a digital access to the PDF so they can reference it. But also, as I mentioned earlier, there are environmental graphics that are located in the on the walls throughout the building that talk about different features of the building, all of the sustainability features, not just net zero. But there are also 4 dashboards, both in the public spaces as well as the schools, for them to access content about the features of their building. They can also see the energy usage, the energy generation from the photovoltaics. They can see the water usage from the rainwater reclamation system. And of course, they can access those from any platform, not just these dashboards. So it's important that we are providing an opportunity for the occupants to continue their education, again, as new students come in or staff changes, and to be able to use that as an educational opportunity if they want to. This particular client was very interested in understanding how they could use data about their building for some of their critical thinking and problem solving curriculum, both in the elementary school and the middle school. Occupant engagement, as I mentioned earlier, is really a key to the whole process. If you don't have this, there's really going to be a breakdown and failure. Before we started this project, we went to a few net zero buildings that were not schools, but were in our area. And the one thing that we were seeing is that a lot of them weren't operating at net zero, and that it seemed that one of the recurring themes we were hearing from the maintenance staff and the occupants of the buildings was that occupants were not as engaged in the design processes they could have been. And so buildings were being used for different things or in different ways, or the schedule of hours of operations, things like that, were very different than were anticipated. And so at the beginning of this project, we created a process to make sure that we were involving the occupants in a way that would help us not only be very realistic about what was going to happen in the building to make sure we weren't underestimating the amount of energy use, but also being able to take advantage of design strategies because we are engaging the occupants that would allow us to achieve energy reduction. So we had a process, and the big piece of this process is really starting with a plan. And even in pre-design, we looked at every phase, including post-occupancy, and set up goals of what we wanted to do in each of those phases for engaging the occupants. And we created this at the beginning and then adjusted it as we went through if there were things that needed to evolve. But this was really key to the process. And being able to implement this, and We also use a variety of tools in the different phases, whether it's, this is a picture of a community, an event for the whole community to come and learn about this project. And we use virtual reality so people could understand the building from a community perspective as well as from an interior perspective. We do different activities and charrettes, both in person as well as through sort of remote sessions. And so for this project, we were able to see some significant savings through our occupant engagement process. One of the biggest ones that we are able to quantify specifically to the occupant engagement is looking at the building and how we ended up laying out the spaces. Again, the academic wing on one side with most of the classrooms, and then the larger group activities like auditoriums and gyms and cafeteria and the public library on another side. And that was through, again, the occupant engagement process and being very rigorous in our understanding of how they use their spaces, when they use their spaces, so that we could basically couple adjacencies in the program of such a big building to be able to have mechanical units and air handling units shared between programs that are very similar in their use, so that in use and their hours of operation, so that you can shut down and set back different pieces throughout the day or week or the year, because this building is basically used 7 days a week, 300 and I don't know, probably 55 days a year. So it has high hours of use. And then in terms of planning, we were able to tie the way that the staff and teachers wanted to work collaboratively with their cohorts and within their classrooms to create ways to save energy by doing all of those things that they needed out of their building. And so we were able to see a fairly significant savings by grouping equipment and energy into teaming rooms, as opposed to having all the time having the same equipment in every single classroom, which is something that happened in their existing spaces. And then renewable energy, as you saw in some of the photos at the beginning, there are photovoltaics basically on every roof surface. We also have facade mounted. That is in a couple different ways. There are sunshades. The actual panels are being used as sunshades over windows. And we have vertical facade mounted PV as well on the east and south. We also have solar thermal, which is used to heat the pool. So the sort of shoulder seasons of the outdoor pool is used to heat that. And then when it's not being used to heat the pool, it also supplements the domestic hot water in the building for the kitchen. And of course, Airstreet is one member of a very large team, and wanted to recognize everyone because this is definitely, as was mentioned earlier, it's a really big coordination between the owner and the design team and the contractor, as it is in any project, but it's also really important in a zero project, so everyone is familiar with the goal. And I would say that the geothermal system, especially on this very tight urban site, was one of the things that we really worked a lot on coordinating that with the contractor. And with that, I would say thank you for your time, and it's very exciting to be able to share this project. And unfortunately, the building will have not been open for quite a while of its first year due to current circumstances. So we're going to be waiting a little bit longer to see if the building is operating to its net zero.
Thanks, Kate. Excuse me. So I'm going to take a couple quick minutes here to talk about just the kind of resources you can use to get to zero. This may be familiar for some of you, but it's kind of the most common question we get is what resources can I use to get to zero? So I'll just walk you through them really quickly. There's quite a few slides, so I'm actually just kind of going to glance over it, and then you guys can, of course, refer back as needed. I mentioned earlier that NBI has a bunch of on-demand Getting to Zero webinars. These are listed here. There's also more, and these also cover more than just schools. If you're more interested in the embodied carbon, or you're interested in codes and policies, or where zero energy buildings stand as is. We have a bunch of schools resources that are located on the Getting to Zero Hub. It's a curated list that include things like technical strategies, district approaches, state policies, national programs, you get it, and case studies of successful projects. I'm going to kind of fly through these, but this is just a quick way to navigate the hub. Sometimes it can be kind of confusing. There are filters that you can use to filter by topic. In the design and process, you might find these tools for zero net energy schools, like the Integrated Design Charrette Toolkit, which you can use to plan out your integrated design charrette. The Z&E Project Guide, which has a bunch of checklists and agendas and things that you can utilize to get to zero over time. The Stakeholder Engagement and Messaging Guide is really useful. It has a bunch of data and supporting facts and citations that are targeted towards specific stakeholders. So, if you're trying to, let's say, convince your school board of lower operating costs of zero energy buildings, there's some data here backed up by science you can use to take to them. We also have the Zero Net Energy Communications Toolkit that has, fact sheets, presentations. The Zero Energy Schools watch list is a great place to go if you're looking for other projects near you, if you want to go visit one, when we're allowed to, of course, or, some of them do have online resources as needed. We cover existing buildings in schools, school and district policies, and then at the state and national level too. We have zero energy school case studies across the nation. Turkey Foot is another Kentucky example, California, Hood River, Oregon, etc. Outside of the Getting to Zero Hub, there's zeroenergy.org that is hosted by the Department of Energy that also has similar resources, including the Advanced Energy Design Guide, which is a really great way to have a prescriptive approach to getting to zero net energy. You should note that this is new construction focused, but is very applicable to retrofits. Shows you how to set EUI targets, how to model, guidance for renewables, and of course, as Kate and Mike were talking about, using zero energy as a catalyst for student learning. There's also an accompanying zero energy process guide that's more of a process approach, so it's a little more appropriate for maybe a school board or a more institutional audience. Another great resource is the Center for Green Schools Learning Lab, which right now is free because of COVID-19. I highly recommend you go and check that out as soon as possible. You can filter by grade level, subject. Subject could be math, science, it could be music, art, and then the theme might be energy efficiency or climate sustainability. They have a really great one. You can see it on here, the Intro to Green Building Benchmarking, their Building Learners program. So you can just take this into your own classrooms. Here's a list of additional resources. And I think that's going to be it for me because I know we have a couple of questions. So I'm just going to leave you with this. Connie, would you mind asking a few questions?
No, not at all. Excuse me. We have a couple for Mike. One, do you have any published data or reports that back up your statements just to be able to share with their local school board?
Yes, we do. I don't have them right here with me, but if you could share the information with good people at NBI, I'd be glad to forward that information on to you.
Sure, Mike. We have a post-webinar follow-up email that will go out tomorrow. If you can get that resource link to me, I'm happy to add it into that follow-up email so people can see it.
Okay.
Okay. There was another question about the Richardsville EUI. You said the number 23, but then you said the number 22. And I'm just wondering we have a couple people who are wondering, did you have a pre-renovation number? And is the 23 the current EUI?
So I'm going off the top of my head. Ironically enough, I'm going to be the district's director of energy management, as well as our current energy director is retiring at the end of July. So Some of the things I knew anecdotally, I now get to know firsthand. So I'm not quite 100% certain on that. He is. I will get that information as well and get that verified.
Great. And another question for you, Mike. What is in the planning that gets you to zero energy, net zero ready?
Basically, we construct all of our schools to be net zero energy schools. The only thing that it would lack is just the actual PV on the building to start generating the solar energy.
Okay, if anybody else has any other questions, you're free to submit them via the question pane. We've got just another minute or so. Riley, do you have anything else to share?
I actually have a question for Kate. Kate, can you tell me or dive in a little bit more about any issues that come up in existing building retrofits, like kind of where the pain points are and how to maybe get over them?
With existing buildings, I think with existing buildings, it's always a question of to insulate or to not insulate and how. That is always a big question. And again, that's where the obviously analysis of dew points and how to do it technically, but also the life cycle cost analysis. We do those a lot on existing buildings, studying different ways to improve the envelope. Because as I mentioned, when you're doing a new construction, the envelope is 100% the best thing you can do in terms of saving or reducing the load so that you can save energy. So in existing buildings, you don't want to rely all on MEP systems in terms of the energy efficiency. So that's always the biggest thing that we're looking at when we have existing buildings. We don't have an existing net zero building, but we do have schools that are in existing buildings where we're trying to hit pretty low EUIs for those. So I would say that that's, and then of course with existing buildings, depending on what type of sites, we do a lot of urban and some suburban work, and so we have very tight sites. So geothermal, which is really the system that's going to get us to the lowest EUIs we can see in schools, aren't always applicable on existing building sites. So we might be looking at air source heat pumps or things like that. So, we might have some restrictions as to what type of mechanical systems we can put in those projects.
Great. Mike, do you have anything to say? I know you have some existing buildings too. Do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do. To go back to that previous question, I was able to put my hands on some information. So for Richardsville Elementary School, our first net zero school, the current site EUI is 14.6. And then Jennings Creek Elementary, the newest one we built, the site EUI is 8.3. And I would say that I'd also share that all of our schools are Energy Star schools, with the exception of Jennings Creek, because it is so new.
Wow, those are impressive EUIs. Congratulations. Well, with that, it's about 11 o'clock here on the West Coast, and moving on towards the later end of the day, towards the East Coast. So we're going to wrap it up and say thank you. And if you have any other questions, feel free to submit them in that survey that you will get with the follow-up email. Thank you so much to both of our presenters, Mike and Kate. It is always a pleasure. I appreciate it so much. And thank you all. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you.